7 years. The voice hit the compound like a thunderclap. Chiamaka's cassava knife stopped moving. Mama Emeka did not walk through the gate. She burst through it, her wrapper flying behind her, her sandals slapping the ground hard with every step, like she was punishing the earth itself for what had happened in this house. 7 years I have been waiting, she screamed, loud enough for every neighbor, every passing child, every woman faking water down the road to hear. 7 years since my son brought this woman into my family, and what has she given us? What? She stopped in the middle of the compound and spread her arms wide, turning slowly as if presenting the emptiness to an invisible audience. Nothing. Empty hands, empty belly, nothing. Chiamaka kept her eyes down. Her hands had started moving again, peeling cassava in slow, careful strokes, as if she were not the subject of this performance, as if the words were rain and she was simply waiting for them to pass. But they were not rain, they were fire. Emeka! Mama Emeka turned to the doorway where her son stood, one hand resting against the frame, her palm wine untouched in her other hand, and her own palm wine untouched in her other hand. Look at your compound, look at it. No child running in that corner, no baby crying inside that room, just silence, a dead silence like a burial ground. She lowered her voice then, which was somehow worse. Is this the home you built? Mama, don't mama me. She pointed one sharp finger at him. I did not carry you for 9 months and push you into this world so that you could grow up and sit in a quiet compound with a quiet wife and no children. Your father's name must continue. Your grandfather's blood must continue. Her voice cracked at the edges, not from sadness, but from fury. I am getting old, Emeka. My knees pain me every morning. My eyes are not strong. I want to hold a grandchild before these hands become too weak to hold anything. She turned then. She turned and looked directly at Chiamaka. The compound went so quiet that a lizard could be heard scraping across the far wall. Mama Emeka walked slowly towards Chiamaka, slowly, the way a storm moves when it is sure of where it is going. She stopped just above her, looking down on the woman crouched over her cassava with all the contempt that 7 years of disappointment could produce. You, she said softly. You sit in my son's house, you eat my son's food, you wear wrapper my son bought, and you cannot do the one thing a woman was created to do. Chiamaka peeled. One stroke. Another. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Chiamaka looked up. Their eyes met. In Chiamaka's eyes there was pain so deep that it had stopped bleeding. In Mama Emeka's eyes there was a verdict, already decided, already signed. A pot that cannot hold water is useless. You throw it away and find a new one. That is what you do. She straightened up and looked at Emeka with absolute authority. Before the next planting season, if there is no child in this compound, I will find my son a second wife myself. I will walk her through that gate with my own hands, dress her, feed her, and settle her in this house. And nobody, she let her eyes cut sideways one last time at Chiamaka. Nobody will stop me. She walked out. The gate swung shut behind her. The compound was silent. Chiamaka looked down at the cassava in her hands. Her knuckles were white from gripping the knife too hard. A small drop of something fell onto the pale white flesh of the peeled yam. She was crying. She had not even felt it start. Emeka did Oz come to her that night. He sat outside in the dark for a long time, and Chiamaka watched the shadow of him through the small window. She lay on the mat in the inner room with her wrapper pulled to her chin, listening to the sound of the village settling into sleep, the distant drum from the next compound, a baby crying somewhere down the road. That baby's cry entered her chest like a needle. She pressed both palms flat against her stomach, flat, still, silent like a stone. She had prayed. She had visited every healer in 3 villages. She had drunk herbs that tasted like mud and bark and things she did not want to know the name of. She had fasted. She had given offerings. She had begged. Nothing. And now, Mama Emeka's words sat on her chest like a heavy rock. Before the next planting season. The planting season was 4 months away. Chiamaka stared at the ceiling. In the darkness, her mind moved through every door it could find, feeling the walls, searching for any opening, any way out, any path that did not end with a second wife walking into her gate, another woman sleeping where she slept, her husband's children calling another woman mother, while she sat in the corner of her own compound like a borrowed pot nobody needed anymore. No, she would not allow it. She did not decide all at once. It crept in slowly, the way termites enter a wall. Small thoughts first. What if I just? No. Push it away. Then it came back, bigger. But what if I? Push it away again. Then one night when Emeka came inside with eyes that would not quite meet hers, something in Chiamaka made a decision that her mouth had not yet said. It started with cloth. Just a small folding, just a slight padding under the wrapper, nothing obvious. She moved it around, adjusting, until the shape sat naturally, a gentle curve, barely noticeable. She changed how she walked the next morning, one hand resting just above her hip, like women did when their body was beginning to feel different weight. She moved slowly. She sat down carefully. She pressed her lips together sometimes, as if fighting a quiet wave of nausea. Emeka noticed on the third day. He came and stood in the doorway watching her struggle to lift a pot of water, and something changed in his face. Something that had been tight and worried in him for months simply opened, like a door. Chiamaka. His voice was careful, gentle, as if speaking too loud might break whatever fragile thing was beginning. She looked up at him, and she held his gaze, and she let the lie walk into the room and sit between them. It is not festin silent, she said quietly, but something feels different. The sound that came out of Emeka was not a word. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 7 years, finally exhaling. He crossed the room and held her face in his hands. She let him. Inside her chest, something cracked, but she kept her face calm, kept her eyes warm. She let him believe. When the news reached Mama Emeka, the woman did not walk. She ran. She arrived at the compound breathing hard, grabbed Chiamaka by both arms, and searched her face with sharp old eyes that had seen too much of the world to be easily fooled. Chiamaka did not flinch. She said quietly, "A spirit came to me in the night. It said I must not be touched by any man until the child arrives safely. The pregnancy is fragile. If the warning is broken, the child will not stay." She watched Mama Emeka's eyes. The old woman was calculating, suspicious, but she wanted grandchildren more than she wanted to be right, and that wanting was bigger than her suspicion. She pulled Chiamaka into her chest so hard it hurt. "God has heard my prayers. Shout the open sky. Finally, finally." She danced. Chiamaka stood inside the old woman's arms and let herself be held, and her face over Mama Emeka's shoulder was the face of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff she had already jumped from, watching the ground rise toward her. Word traveled through Umudara the way all important things did, on the mouths of women, from compound to compound, before the morning fire had fully caught. They came with gifts, fabric and palm oil, and ground crayfish. Older women came to press their palms against her growing stomach and pronounce blessings with eyes full of real joy, joy that Chiamaka received and accepted and quietly died inside.
4 months, 5 months, 6. Every night she adjusted the padding with hands that had learned to move quickly in the dark. Every morning she assembled the performance again. The tired eyes, the cravings, the slow walk, the hand on the back. Emeka moved his sleeping mat to the outer room without complaint. He brought her things without being asked. He sat close to her in the evenings and talked about names, about which direction the child's room should face, about whether the first cry at birth meant a boy or girl according to his grandmother's saying. She listened, she nodded, she smiled. And at night when he was asleep, she lay on her mat with her hand pressed to her flat stomach and whispered into the darkness, words that were half prayer and half madness. "I just need one child. Just one. Is that too much? Is that too much to ask?" 7 months passed, then 8, and then the 9th month arrived and sat on Chiamaka's chest like a stone. The women were already organizing. Mama Emeka had moved herself into the compound 2 weeks before the expected date, sleeping in the outer room, cooking, watching, waiting. Neighbors brought food. The midwife had been spoken to. Everything was ready. For a child that did not exist, Chiamaka could not sleep. She could not eat. She sat in the room at night listening to Mama Emeka snoring on the other side of the wall and felt the world closing in from every direction. There was no more time. There was no more road. There was only one direction left, and it led into the forest. She rose at the hour when even the night birds are quiet. She removed the padding from her stomach slowly and stood for a moment in the darkness, feeling her own body, real and flat and hers, and breathed. Then she tied her wrapper, picked up her small lamp, and walked out of the compound without looking back. The forest accepted her without ceremony. Branches reached for her wrapper, roots caught at her feet. The darkness between the trees was the kind of darkness that has weight, that presses against your skin and your eyes and makes you feel like the world you know has ended somewhere behind you. She did not stop. She had heard about the shrine of the forgotten all her life. Every child in Umudara was told the same warning in the same flat, serious voice. Never go into the deep forest. Never approach the old tree at the center. What is left there for a reason. The gods do not forgive trespassing. She believed it then. She believed it now. She went anyway. She heard the baby before she saw the lamp catch the basket. The sound stopped her blood. A thin cry, delicate as spider thread, rising from somewhere ahead in the dark. She moved toward it before she had decided to. Her feet simply went. The basket sat at the base of a tree so old and wide that 3 men could not wrap their arms around it. The roots rose from the ground like frozen rivers. And in the basket, wrapped in cloth so white it seemed to gather what little light existed in that place, was a baby girl. Chiamaka knelt. The child's eyes were open. They were bright, too bright, the brightness of something that was not quite of this world. They looked at her steadily, with a calm that no newborn infant possessed, as if the child had been lying here waiting and had simply been curious whether it would be this particular woman who came. Every sense in Chiamaka's body screamed at her to stand up, to back away, to leave this place and never return. Her arms reached into the basket and lifted the child. The baby was warm, solid, real. She tucked her against her chest and the child made a small sound and turned her face into Chiamaka's neck, and in that moment, every wall inside Chiamaka collapsed completely. "I have you," she whispered into the baby's hair. Her voice was shaking. "I have you now. You are mine." Above them, something moved in the high branches, a sound like breath, like the forest exhaling slowly around what had just been taken from it. Chiamaka did not look up. She turned and walked back through the dark, holding her stolen child against her heartbeat, moving fast, not running because she was afraid running would tell the forest she knew she was doing something wrong. She already knew. She walked fast anyway. The birth was performed at dawn with the half-blind midwife, with mud and snail water and the sounds a woman makes when she has decided that this story must go a certain way, no matter what it costs her. The baby cried, real, loud, alive. And Mama Emeka, who had been waiting outside the door with her fists pressed together and her lips moving in prayer, heard that cry and let out a sound that shook the compound walls. She rushed in and snatched the baby and held her up toward the ceiling, turning, tears running freely down her old hard face, her whole body trembling. A girl, God has remembered this house. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. She pressed her to her chest. She turned and looked at Chiamaka lying on the mat, pale and exhausted from the performance of a lifetime. And for the first time in 7 years, Mama Emeka looked at her daughter-in-law with something other than contempt. She said, "You have done well." 3 small words from that mouth. Those 3 words. Chiamaka closed her eyes. Tears ran sideways into her hair. They were not tears of joy. They named the child Amara, and the trouble had only just begun. For 3 years, the compound was full of laughter. Amara grew fast. She laughed easily. She had a way of tilting her head when she was listening to something the adults could not hear. They thought it was adorable, a child's game, the kind of sweet strangeness that small children have before the world makes them ordinary. Then the goats began to die. First one morning, then 2 days later, another. Then the whole pen in 1 week, with no sickness anyone could name. The farm closest to the compound stopped producing. Whatever was planted near the house came up thin and pale, like plants growing in borrowed light. And Emeka's hands began to shake. It started with his right hand, a tremor that came and went, then both hands, then a weakness that climbed slowly up his arms and into his chest until some mornings he could not rise from his mat without help. No healer could explain it. No herb touched it. The man who once been strong enough to clear half an acre before noon now lay on his mat in the middle of the day staring at the ceiling. Chiamaka watched all of it and said nothing. Because she knew. She had always known from the moment she lifted that child out of the shrine basket what she had done. She had simply been praying, hoping, bargaining with silence that the gods would not collect their debt. The gods were collecting. It was Amara herself who finally made it impossible to pretend. The girl was 7 years old, standing in the middle of the compound in the early afternoon when Chiamaka came around the corner of the hut and stopped cold. Amara was speaking, not to another child, not to herself, to the air. Her small lips moved quickly, steadily, in a language Chiamaka had never heard, and the leaves of every tree in the compound were bending toward her. Not in wind, because there was no wind. Bending, leaning, as if listening, as if straining to be closer to what the child was saying. 3 birds sat on Amara's outstretched arms without moving. A dog that had bitten 2 men last month lay flat at her feet with its chin on the ground, its eyes soft.